Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues from the board, I must first thanks the organizer for inviting me to this very interesting and very important conference. Thank you very much. Today I'm going to speak about sport tourism, and especially for sport tourism for local sustainable development. Despite the economic crisis, tourism remains a steady sector, sport tourism being the branch which developed the fastest. The notion of sport tourism appeared in the 80s in Europe and in the United States in the same time to define a series of practices belonging to both sport and tourism, understood in a general way. The slide you got on the screen show a commercial I found for a site in France, mostly known for its cows, not at all for the tourism or perhaps for some green tourism. But if you look behind at the bridge, what do you see? People walking, biking, hiking. I mean that for a lot of tourism organizers, sport is now something very, very important, and we'll find that later on a more wide scale. So we can see that even if some sport federations have been interested in this phenomenon for many years, the World Tourism Organization has still not classified it as a category on its own, just like other kind of tourism, culture tourism, gastronomy tourism, art tourism, etc. The main difficulty being probably due to the very strong link between sports and tourism, because it is so natural to travel, to go to a sport event, skiing, fishing, or something else, whether it is to practice, to organize, or to assist to some events, sport events. It doesn't appear at first as obvious to study economical and sociological effects it can have, nor to analyze the long-term correspondence of an event or a facility when coming to sustainable development. That is to say, taking into account the social, economical, and environmental aspects. So, what is sport tourism? At first, we must see that sport tourism is not new at all. I say that the world appeared during the last 30 years, mostly, but it's something very old. We can distinguish three different eras. We could refer to the Olympic Games, which appeared in the antiques in 776 before Christ. The sport facility allowed a large crowd to participate. In Olympia, for instance, the stadium could receive 40,000 people. We also know that the athletes representing their city were accompanied by, we say, supporters who were encouraging them during the games. From the 17th century to the beginning of the 20s, the young aristocrats willing to become gentlemen, and it only concerned men, not women. These young men, these young aristocrats, had to travel to the Grand Tour, all the way to Rome. We come across this kind of segregation again in the beginning of the 20th century, when the Baron Pierre de Coubertin was standing against the idea of women taking part to the Olympic Games. Female Olympics would be impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and incorrect. So it is due to this Grand Tour, which lasted from 6 to 18 months, that the potential of mountains and mountains sports were discovered. The upper class of the second half of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century also had a role in the development of sport tourism. Having inherited, when still quite young, the privileged young men kept away from money matters had to find something to do. And what to do? They could get involved into politics, in culture, but also in sport and tourism. That's why Thorstein Veblen said at the end of the 18th century that sport is a conspicuous waste of time. Around the 1840-1860, English doctors started to advise their rich patients to go and get some rejuvenating air in the mountains. This new kind of tourism led to the creation of resorts such as Davos, Arosa, Montana, Saint-Maurice in Switzerland, and in the Arlberg in Austria, and in the Vercors in France. Some resorts tried to bring their summer customer to come back in winter, and they invented the winter sport holidays. The English were the instigators. Various sports could be practiced: ice skating, sledging, curling, the main one being downhill skiing. Downhill was the only recognized type of ski at that time. Downhill only road learn. And the equipment and the instructor were Norwegian. We have to bear in mind that even before going to frenzy downhill, on slope which were not prepared, the skiers asked to go up the mountains by foot or with the help of sealskin. To make it easier, chairlifts started to appear at the end of 1924. With the inflation generated by the First World War and the Wall Street crash in 1929, the bourgeoisie went bankrupt, and in the 30s, the workforce was more concerned about working time and purchasing power than tourism, culture, and sports. It's not until the mid of the 50s that the purchasing power and the amount of free time of the middle class had increased enough to allow sport and tourism to go beyond the circles and the privileged social group. It's now time to shift to an approach of what is sport tourism today. One of the difficulties about defining sport tourism is due to the meaning of the two words, sport and tourism, themselves. Voluntarily, I forgot about the debates linked to these two definitions. It would be too long today. We just try to see two types of approach concerning sport tourism. The first one, I could say the traditional approach, is by destination or by demand. So there is a typology. The first point concerns sport tourism for action, which includes the whole range of activities for participating to high-level competition, or even to practice only flight fishing in Ireland, any kind of sport when you practice by yourself. Second point, sport tourism for entertainment, which covers essentially the influx of people traveling to beat a sport event. It has probably been reinforced by the media coverage of the major sport events. And speaking about media, it would be a bit tricky if we ask ourselves if watching a competition on a screen, TV, computer, telephone, is a kind of virtual sport tourism, just like we can talk about virtual tourism for people who travel just through the pictures brought by the screens, by the new audiovisual technology, just sitting in the armchair. The cultural sport tourism refers to visiting the sites of past major events. For instance, in Berlin, the stadium of the Olympics in 1936, there is only the original facade still remains, but it continues to attract visitors, just like the changing rooms. Sorry, I'm still in Berlin. Just like the changing rooms of the Stade de France in Paris, where the French team won the World Cup in 1998, or even the tour trips in Barcelona always go through the Montjuic, where stand the main Olympic facilities, stadium, swimming pool, and so on. Last point, the activist sport tourism is a direct result of the need for the sport movement to be ruled and administrated. It's necessary for the representative leaders and technicians to travel, as well as for the staff going along with the teams, for instance. Probably it would be possible to add other points to this typology. Another approach is the approach by the supply side. Following the first approach by demand or by destination brings an issue. Sport tourism, defined by destination, overlooks all the entertaining activities practiced during a tourism trip that doesn't have sport as a main purpose. Economically speaking, it is forgetting about all the activities generally developed by small companies. And those companies, those activities developed by small companies are added to a trip having other purpose, professional purpose, tourism, and so on. It's also disregarding trekking. That means traveling with no accommodation, but trekking requires spending money on renting, buying equipment, for instance, dinghy, skis, bikes, etc. Buying passes for the sites, if you want to practice down here or cross-country skiing. Various expenditure, just like food and drinks, etc. This approach also forgets that the tourism sectors knows how to respond to the customer wish of having an access to sport facility, even if they don't use them to sell traditional trips. The tourist developers want to offer the most possible facility to the buyers, the tourists. More than 50% of offers advertise the possibility of entertaining activity courses, different activity organized or not, gyms, etc. If it's necessary to make the difference between an approach based on demand and one based on supply, it's essential to know how to spot the potential of a region, the potential of an event, of a site for sport tourism, just to evaluate the advantage and to highlight the risks. The risk, we'll speak about the risk in a minute. We may hear a lot about the effects of major sport events. What is the effects of the Olympic Games, of the World Cup, for instance? But we don't hear about what a middle-sized structure or event can bring. That's a very important point for us. So, sport tourism and sustainable development. The main interest of targeting and defining what this kind of tourism involves, to study it more precisely, is the fact that it has a huge potential for sustainable development by relying on organizations, structures, and facilities on a more reasonable, human-sized scale. But it's also dangerously threatening the environment and or the locals who might be excluded. Let's take some example to illustrate this idea. First example, Lorient in France. Lorient, it's just here under the nose of France. Lorient is a small port, not small, with 60,000 inhabitants. And in June 2012, it will welcome one leg of a famous sailing race, the Volvo Ocean Race, the former Whitbread. It's a race between teams all around the world on a monohull and with stopovers. Lorient has been looking for a few years to get some visibility by organizing sailing competitions. His decision to take part in supervising a stopover in this race was inspired from Galway, an Irish town with 70,000 people, say 70,000 inhabitants. So it's absolutely comparable to Lorient. But Lorient's infrastructures are more, yes, infrastructure and the economical background, the sailing heritage too, are far more developed than in Galway. But for Galways, which welcomed a leg of the same race in 2009, the economical consequences generated by the visitors during the 15-day stopover are estimated to 55 million euros. The indirect effects are quite surprising. For instance, the race is thought to have generated 15% increase in registration in the University of Galway. 50% more in registration. For the local company who understood the importance of the impact, they still had a positive impact 1.5 years after the event. This is the example of a one-off event that had a rather positive effect on the process of a long-term sustainable development. Another example, on the other side, again in France, after having tried to bring skiing in its full potential by all means, the French mountains have now the best facilities in the world, and the resorts that have been constructed everywhere without taking the environment into account, just to attract as many tourists as possible, are now overwhelmed by trash and wastewater handling and evacuation problems. When some solutions start to come into light regarding the architecture and waste treatment, the matter with artificial snow is also brought up. To attract tourists, the resort provides them snow-covered slopes all winter, thus emptying the water supplies to make artificial snow. Let me also point out the works necessary to bring this water to the snow canons, which disturb the local fauna, the use of construction vehicles and snow plows flattening the ground and damaging the flora, the noise generated by the snow cannons walking at night and disturbing the animal world, mostly nocturnal in this environment, but also the seeding of water with the bacteria, allowing it to turn to snow even a few degrees above zero. Even if nobody can guess what kind of consequences this bacteria will have on the long term, it's still used as snow is the only way to attract tourists in an economy that has planned virtually no other solution to rely on the short and long-term climate change. Another problem is the influx of people coming to the villages and sending the local population away from the resorts. The locals now have to live in villages that can be far from their places of work, further down the valley, because the accommodation close to the resorts has become too expensive for them. A great part of the new jobs brought by the resorts being seasonal, it's most of the time non-locals who work there, even if the pay is generally not great. So we have here an example of a completely unbalanced development of a sport tourism activity that has a much negative impact sociologically and environmentally speaking. Only the economical aspect is rather positive, even though it varies a lot from one year to the next. Third example is the events in the Valley de Joux. The Valley de Joux is in Switzerland, so we cross France and we go here, this way, this place. And the Valley de Joux is really in front of France, 5 kilometers from the border. Three villages stand around a lake, so yes, for you to understand better, France is here, around 5 kilometers from this village, Le Sentier. And what I'm speaking about for the sport complex is located here in Le Sentier. And to go out of this valley, because it's a valley here and there, it's mountains, to go out of the valley, there is 2 passes on this way. And I speak about the road all around the lake. You see, it's this one. So, I say that 3 villages stand around the lake, and apart from the road leading out of the valley, there is just this road, 25 kilometers, going all around the lake. The valley has invested in a sports center to combine an ice rink, that combines an ice rink, a swimming pool, a sport hall, tennis courts, and so on. At first, these facilities were grouped in one only place, and their only purpose was to meet the locals' needs only. We must not forget that thanks to the lake and to the mountains, the place has long been a destination for tourism, offering the whole range of water sports from swimming to water skiing, sailing, windsurfing, but also hiking with snowshoes in winter, cycling, skiing downhill, and cross-country skiing, etc., etc. The tourism office has long been dealing with hotels and accommodation. It rapidly became necessary to organize sports events to raise money. I told you that at first it was only for local need, but it was not possible economically to continue this way. So it was necessary to organize sports events to raise money for the sports center. And the sports center and the tourism office moved in a single location, I told you, in Le Sentier, so that so they could combine sport and tourism in favor of the development of the local socio-economical activity. Sport competition, there is about 40 competitions a year, are organized very locally and centered around the sports center and its staff. Thus, the team organizing the events is not temporary, as it's often the case. And so, the process of researching and collaborating with the sponsors and partners can be carried on over the years. Facilities, welcoming pupils, teams, seminars, all sorts of groups have been constructed just nearby the sports center. To organize their sports events, summer and winter triathlon, ice hockey tournaments, slow up, dragon boats, etc., etc., money and people are required. For the people, the organizer rely on the valley's inhabitants who will walk there for free. Even if in this place, like everywhere, there are less and less free walkers, it is still the locals who are at the core of the events. We can observe, for instance, a first kind of short-term economical consequences for the local clubs and organizations that have a stall along the slower path. Slower path is all around the lake. During one day, there is no car around the lake, and you can move only by the strength of your muscles. You can run, you can bike, you can go by rollers as you want, exactly as you want. And each year it's between 25 and 35,000 people in one day who come to this event. So, if for the local clubs which have a stall along the path, they get money, of course, they get benefits, and they can buy equipment and infrastructures for their members and for the inhabitants of the community. As for the financial needs, the local companies, mostly watchmakers and farmers, understand where their interests lie. These companies support the sports and cultural structures as well as the sport events organized in the valley. This way, they want the youth to know their name so as to recruit new staff. That's one of their more important problems, to find good workers, qualified workers, and to develop the team spirit in their employees, but also to promote an image of perseverance, tenacity, and team spirit. As I already said, one of the treasures of this region is its natural environment. All the events strictly respect this environment, and the emphasis is put on managing and recycling the waste and a responsible behavior from the participants. For instance, for the triathlon, the organizers signed an agreement with the company, which name is recycling, and there are eco zones where people can recycle their waste all over the site. The food that is distributed is mostly fruits, which avoid using any unnecessary packaging. Registrations are made via the internet, so no paper is wasted, and the contestant would be immediately disqualified if they were to drop their litter on the floor during the event. The race starts 500 meters from the train station, so that people don't need to take their car, to use their car. It is this idea of protecting the environment that makes the valley's events very special. The organizers develop eco-events too. On the day of the triathlon, for instance, they offer a green event when road bikes are replaced by mountain bikes. Slower promotes a human-powered mobility for the whole day, as I told you. The individual is not forgotten in this project. The Dragon Boat Race is an opportunity to support cancer research, and it advertises the notion of solidarity. The contestants are crews representing big companies such as Dell, UBS, Cargill, Caterpillar, Sanofi Aventis, etc., etc. This race is a good opportunity to do some internal team building, develop relationships between the companies, and convey a message to the customer with absolutely positive local socio-economical consequences, as the Vallée de Joux is getting famous through this kind of events, which then attracts tourists, employees, and companies. For me, it's the best example of sport-based sustainable development I could think of. To conclude, even though sport tourism is the most dynamic field of the global economic sector, and even if it has had the steadiest growth for many years, the knowledge we have about it could be compared to the one we had of sports economics in Europe in the early 80s. For instance, when I defended my thesis in '82, I was the only second economist in France speaking about sport tourism. So we knew absolutely nothing, about sport, economy of sport. We knew absolutely nothing about economy of sport at that time. So our knowledge concerning sport tourism is virtually non-existent. All surveys show that this progression will remain strong in the next few years with, as in every other branch of tourism, a change in demand linked to the ups and downs of the global economy, as well as to the changes in the customers themselves. It is then necessary to study this field on an international level to compare the experiences, increase our knowledge, establish models of developments so that the investors, the administrators, can find the information of how much profit they could generate on the short term, not only on the short term, but taking into account the sustainable development of the region in which they wish to invest. That is the reason why it's necessary to develop a structure that could carry some fundamental research on sport tourism, as well as practical researches that could bring some answer to the concrete matters. That is the objective of the International Master in Sport Tourism Engineering that trains students doing a master degree and give them an international experience as they visit 4 countries in 2 years. And the International Research Network in Sport Tourism that combine university research by bringing more than 20 universities from around the globe to work on sport tourism together. We work too with a lot of different structures such as the United Nations, the International Labour Organization, the IOC, and other international sport federations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.